Hey guys, how you doing? Welcome to another edition of Just a Plant Room. Today I wanted to talk to you about low light plants. Um, so if you're interested in this type of content, stick around. All right, as I mentioned in the intro, I wanted to talk to you a little bit today about low light plants. I see a lot of posts asking what plants can live in a room with no light or with very little light, or for instance, the real popular one is a bathroom with no windows. There are quite a few plants that could potentially live in a low light situation, but one thing that we need to understand is that low light doesn't mean no light. When we talk about low light plants, there still has to be a source of light, whether that's from a window or, maybe a grow light or an overhead light. Either will work, but they do need some type of light to photosynthesize. With that being said, low light plants or plants that you keep in a low light condition typically need less watering. So if they're not getting sun or light, they typically tend to take a little bit longer to dry out. So those are one of the things that we need to monitor carefully when we put a plant in a low light situation. But today I wanted to show you a couple of plants that will do well in a low light environment. And we'll start with the ones I have on my table. This is the Scindapsus pictus. I've had this light, not the light, I've had this plant for about 2 years, I want to say. And she does well. She lives here in the plant room, and you'd say, well, that's not low light. But actually, it is. She sits behind me on a shelf under another plant. So the light that she receives is not highlight. It's not even bright light. It's not even bright and direct light. It's really low light. But she seems to thrive in that situation. If we take a quicker look at her, you'll see that she is putting out new growth, and she seems to be happy in that situation. This plant, because of where she lives and where she sits in this plant room, she gets watered maybe once every 10 to 14 days. And even though she's in a chunky soil mix, she still retains water a little longer because she's not getting that bright light hitting on her. What I like to note is that even though she's not getting that bright light, she still puts out sizable leaves, but her growth pattern is a little slow. So she doesn't put out leaves as frequently as she would if she were in a higher light situation. So another plant that does well in low light is the staghorn fern. Now, staghorns are epiphytes. They tend to grow on trees. They really don't need soil or medium to survive. They tend to do well in a low light situation. This one is, I would say, I don't know if there's such a thing, and I've never seen it written, but she does well in bright low light, if you will. She lives in what I call the orange room, off of the wall, and she gets very low light from a grow light that hangs above. And this would be because she's at a distance from that light. As you can see, this plant is doing pretty well. Could she do better? Probably if she were in a better light situation, but I'm not complaining because if you notice here, she's putting out a baby, and I've tried to unbury this baby, and I keep moving the medium around to give it a chance to breathe and come above where the soil is. But she's hanging in there, and I would consider this plant to be in a very low light situation. As you can see, my medium for this particular plant is just plain old cocoa chips. She doesn't have any soil. It's just cocoa chips. This plant gets watered maybe once a week to 10 days, if that. You know, again, as I mentioned, they're epiphytes, so they rely on the water that they get from the plants or the rain that drips down. She seems to be happy in that situation. I originally had this plant on a mount and she was not thriving there, so I took her off and just put her in this medium. So staghorn fern seems to do well in low light. Another plant that I'd like to talk a little bit about is the ponytail palm. Now, I have to say, I was very surprised because I thought this plant actually needed brighter light. She's been growing fairly well. I bought this plant as a very small baby. She had all of these bulbs in there, and in my care, she's put out this one right here. For me, it's been easy growing. I've never repotted this plant. This plant is in the same pot that I bought her in. I would guess that this medium it's got perlite in it, but it seems to be mostly moss. And what I love about her is that I can move her from place to place and she doesn't seem to throw a hissy fit as long as she's getting some type of light. Currently, she lives on the shelf here in the plant room, and the light that she's getting is very low light. She doesn't have a prime spot, if you will. But she seems to thrive on that. She's happy and healthy and growing. The leaves that are bent have been from me trying to move her from place to place. But this is one that you could potentially put in a low light situation. The next plant that I wanted to show you is the Ficus benjamina. Now, I've had this Ficus benjamina for about 2 years, but let me tell you that when I got her, she was about this big. Now, what I did notice about this plant is that she is kind of low light. She does live in this plant room. She stays on the shelf over here in the corner, and even though there is a grow light there, she's hidden behind a jungle boogie, syngonium. So the light that she's getting is very filtered. I wouldn't consider it high filtered light. I would consider it low filter light. And I've seen some rumblings about this plant that say, you know, you shouldn't move her. If you find a spot for her, leave her there. What I've found is that if you move her within her vicinity. Don't take her too far away, and if you do, give her a moment to acclimate. This plant has been moved several times, trying to find her happy spot. Right now, currently, her happy spot is on that shelf. And she seems to be doing fine. She's growing, she puts out new leaves, and I have absolutely no complaints because I can put her in an area that's not a prime spot. She gets light, but she doesn't get indirect light. I mean, she doesn't get direct light. So I would consider this to be somewhat of a low light plant as long as she's getting some light. The next one is one that is very popular. You know, with the season being what it is, spring and everything, bromeliads. So bromeliads are all over the place. I was just at Home Depot and saw they've got them from itty bitties to huge. This one has not flowered for me. I've had this one for about a year, but she's beautiful. Now, this one really does live in a low light situation. This one lives in the orange room, and she's behind a bigger plant that doesn't get very much light. She lives in this little pot. I don't take her out of here. She gets watered maybe once every 2 weeks or so when I notice that the soil is dry. She seems to thrive. She seems to be very happy and in that spot. And what's not to love? She almost looks like a mother-in-law's tongue, just has a little bit more variety to her and a little bit more markings on her leaves. But this is another one that I think would thrive in a low light situation. And remember, low light does not mean no light. And then another variety I want to visit is the aglaonema. commonly referred to as the Chinese evergreen. Bear with me while I rearrange these plants here so I can get her front and center. So, aglaonemas, there are a ton of varieties. I find that the aglaonemas that are mostly green, I'm not talking about the ones with the pink variegation, and I'm not talking about the ones that have a lot of white on the leaves, with speckles of green. I'm talking about the ones that are green like this. This is the Maria. There is another variation called the Silver Bay, and if you go to malls and things of that nature, office buildings, you'll see the Maria and the Silver Bay and those type of establishments that get light but not bright light. If you walk through a mall, the light that you see as you're walking is pretty much low light. It's not high light. These plants seem to do well in those environments. This Maria I've had for about 2 years. I bought as a small plant. I recently potted her because she was kind of root bound in the pot that she was in. I've got her in the self-watering pot. She's in a chunky, I use a chunky aeroid mix for all of my plants. And as you can see from here, she's got chips, cocoa bark. She's got perlite, charcoal, and things of that nature just to keep her nice and airy. But this is another one of those plants that would do really well in a low light environment and not miss a beat. Again, I can't emphasize enough that low light doesn't mean no light. So if you've got a spot in your home that's low light and you'd love to have a plant there, watch how the light plays there. If there's a window that's in the distance, see how it plays on the wall, and then decide whether you might need a grow light. You may need to supplement that area with something in order to get a plant to grow there. A couple of other plants that would do well in those type of conditions is a ZZ plant. Now, remember, ZZs are a rhizome. They have this potato thing that looks, all I can call it is a potato. Those plants, if you put them in a low light situation, please remember that they don't require as much water. If you put a ZZ in a place where it's not getting a lot of light, you may only need to water that plant once a month because they store water in those rhizomes. And if you water it too frequently, they will rot on you. And then you'll have to propagate the plant, the leaves, or whatever, however you propagate. Another one of the plants that does well in low light is a Dracaena. Now, Dracaenas are recently reclassified. So you've got the one that is oh gosh, I forget what it's called, but the one that has the leaves hanging down. We'll show you a picture of that one. I have one, it's just not down here with me. Those, they do really well in low light as well. And then you have the mother-in-law's tongue, which I've got 2, and they're fairly huge. Those 2 plants don't get watered but once every 2 or 3 months because they're in huge pots. And because they're not getting that sun or, that light, they're literally, I promise you, in a low light situation, they don't need water that often because they can't process that water. They just don't get enough light to photosynthesize and to move that water along their systems. And I don't fertilize them very often either, simply because of that fact. They just don't get enough light to process that. And I don't want to cause any root burn or root rot or anything like that. So those plants, about once every 2 months, if that, because of where they live. A couple of other plants that you might consider, let's see, the peace lily. Now, the peace lily is one of those plants that people struggle with. And I think we struggle because we tend to either overwater them or not water them enough. I've had a peace lily for about I want to say 16, 17 years. It was one of the first plants my husband bought me when we moved into this home, and I still have her. And granted, she dwindled a little bit when I repotted her. I tried to separate her, and then she didn't do well, and I put her all back together. She's currently in, I would consider, a very low light situation. She gets watered once every 2 weeks. She's in a very large pot. She hasn't flowered for me since I've put her in that situation. And I think that's because she's not getting enough light. But is she living? Yes. Is she thriving? No. She would do a lot better if I had her in a position where she was getting at least 4 to 6 hours of daylight. And she's not getting that right now. So she looks good. I mean, you wouldn't be able to tell that there's anything wrong, but she is struggling because she's not getting sufficient light. So those are some of the things that we should consider when we're looking for a plant to put in a place where we don't have enough light. Either consider or think about giving them a grow light, or just don't put them in a low light situation. If you want, your plant will live in low light, but will it thrive? Probably not. You want to make sure that they have sufficient light, even if it's only a couple of hours. So investing in a grow light could potentially help that situation, and help them to thrive a little bit more. So that's my 2 cents on low light plants. Now, if you like this type of content, make sure to subscribe, hit that bell so you'll know when we have a new video come out, and share, invite a friend. Want to grow this community. We're getting there. I want to get a little bit bigger than where we are. We're sitting at about 550. I need all of you to subscribe and to join the community. And I want to thank you for spending time with me today. You guys have a wonderful day, and I hope to see you again. Bye.